And so, with her confidence growing, Lena prepared for whatever absurd challenge would come next. Because one thing was certain, no one was going to see her coming. Riser the Infinite floated silently in his private chamber, his nebula-like form rippling with the currents of dark energy. The pulsating stars within his body flickered erratically, his concentration fractured by the crushing weight of defeat. He stared at the holographic projection before him, the replay of his match against Lena Carter flashing in vivid detail. Each moment was like a punch to the gut. He watched himself manipulate the gravitational fields, the black hole swallowing everything in its wake. And then, just like that, the rock wrapped in duct tape defied the natural order of things. It exploded into a random chaos, scattering the forces he had so carefully crafted. This cannot be, Riser growled under his breath. He replayed the moment again and again, trying to make sense of it. How? He murmured. How did this human manage to outwit me? The data streams surrounding him hummed, but they brought no clarity. He had studied every competitor thoroughly, meticulously calculating their movements, analyzing their combat techniques, and measuring their abilities. Lena Carter was supposed to be a non-threat, a simple, unpredictable human, out of place in this grand, intergalactic competition. She was supposed to fold under pressure, to crumble in the face of superior intellect and power. And yet, she had won. She had won, and in a way that should have been impossible. He could still feel the moment when his calculations failed him, the chaos of the black hole, the explosion of debris, and Lena's triumphant grin as she stood, holding that ridiculous rock. Duct tape. It's not even a real weapon, he thought bitterly. How did I let her get the better of me? Riser's internal energies rippled with agitation, his dark nebulae swirling violently. He had never encountered an opponent like this, a creature that refused to be calculated, a being who defied the very principles he had spent centuries refining. I've seen everything, Riser murmured, his voice heavy with frustration. I've seen battles across galaxies, victories claimed by those with the greatest minds, the greatest strength. And yet, this one human, with her antics, her unpredictability, she challenges everything I know. The more Riser replayed the match, the more his mind raced. Her tactics had been chaotic, unrefined, yet somehow they worked. In her movements, in her actions, there was a subtle intelligence he couldn't quite comprehend. She didn't play by the rules. She bent them, manipulated them into something new. She's not breaking the rules, Riser muttered, his nebula form flashing with a mixture of disbelief and dawning comprehension. She's breaking the game. The thought lingered in his mind, unsettling him. For the first time in centuries, Riser felt something unfamiliar creeping into his psyche, doubt. His traditional ways, the methods that had never failed him before, suddenly seemed irrelevant. Could it be that the future of combat isn't in control, isn't in precision? He paused, considering the idea. The foundation of his entire existence had been built upon the belief that strength, intelligence, and order were the ultimate tools of power. And now, Lena Carter, this human, had shattered that notion with nothing more than chaos, instinct, and a roll of duct tape. I had been playing by their rules, Riser realized. By the rules of tradition, by the laws that have governed the covenant of gifting for millennia. But she doesn't play by those rules. He clenched his energy, his form flickering in agitation. She does what she feels, what she thinks will work. The realization hit him like a pulse of energy. For so long, he had placed his faith in structure, in logic, in the predictability of the known universe. But Lena had shown him a new path, a path where the rules could be bent, where unpredictability could be wielded as a weapon. Could it be that tradition, the very thing that had defined his existence, had become his weakness? Riser's thoughts turned inward, unraveling as he tried to recalibrate his worldview. His great mind raced, but there was no solution in sight. Lena was a force he couldn't predict, a chaos he couldn't contain. She was a threat unlike any other, and that realization gnawed at him. Across the arena, the other competitors were noticing the same thing. The Draxian warlord, who had once laughed at Lena's antics, now stared at her with a cautious respect. The Vishari energy manipulator, who had once floated with an air of superiority, was now watching her closely, wondering if there was more to this human than anyone had thought. In the quiet of his chamber, Riser's nebula form shimmered as he clenched his fists, the stars inside him flickering violently. I will not be undone by a human, he thought, his voice low and fierce. I will not be outdone by chaos. But even as he muttered those words, a creeping doubt took root. The game had changed, and whether he liked it or not, he was no longer in control. As Lena prepared for the final round of the Covenant of Gifting, the atmosphere in the arena was electric. Across the vast, shimmering coliseum of Nexus Prime, every seat was filled with a mixture of eager spectators, alien dignitaries, curious visitors from across the galaxy, and competitors who had witnessed her unorthodox methods firsthand. The air buzzed with anticipation, but there was an underlying tension, a strange discomfort as they all awaited the inevitable clash. Lena, the unpredictable human, against the most skilled beings the universe had to offer. Every competitor had been meticulously trained for years, some even for centuries. Their combat techniques were a fusion of science, mysticism, and raw, controlled power. But Lena Carter, a single mother who had no business being in this contest, had defied all expectations. Now, her name was spoken in hushed tones, and it wasn't out of respect. No, it was a mix of disbelief and bewilderment. How was she still standing? Betting markets across the galaxy, typically so reliable in predicting outcomes, now displayed nothing but a stark message. Error does not compute. It was as though the algorithm itself couldn't process the sheer improbability of a human advancing to the final. Lena wasn't fazed by the buzz. She stretched her legs casually, still wearing her simple black jumpsuit with the faded logo of the cargo shipping company that employed her. The weight of the situation hadn't quite sunk in yet. Her mind was focused on the next moment, the next absurd trick she might pull off. As she looked around the arena, she noticed how the other competitors were reacting to her presence. The Jorvok, an ancient species of warlords renowned for their combat prowess, whispered among themselves in clipped tones. They exchanged nervous glances and made subtle, tactical adjustments to their gear. The Severith, known for their speed and agility, studied her every move with an intensity that bordered on paranoia. And the Kidhar, energy manipulators whose very presence distorted electromagnetic fields, appeared to be recalibrating their weapons, as though they feared Lena's next move could disrupt their very essence. Above them all loomed the Grandmaster Zixo, the undefeated champion for 300 years. He floated high above the arena, his form an intricate tapestry of shifting scales and light. His face, usually unreadable, now betrayed a faint hint of unease. He had studied every competitor, calculated every potential outcome, and yet, for the first time in his long reign, he was forced to confront the fact that there was no formula for Lena. She didn't play by the rules, and worse yet, she seemed to enjoy it. As Lena approached the final battlefield, a place surrounded by ancient pillars of glowing obsidian, she felt the weight of every gaze upon her. The silence was thick, almost suffocating. The officials, beings of immense influence in the Covenant of Gifting, looked on in disbelief. How could this human, with no special powers or advanced technology, have made it so far? She noticed one of the officiators, a tall, crystalline figure known as Vok, his many facets shifting nervously. He had spoken earlier, suggesting she might not even be allowed to continue the final due to her methods being unorthodox. But she had defied the odds, winning match after match. Now, the murmurs from the elite crowd grew louder, more uncertain. Some speculated that the humans' luck had run out. Others, however, had begun to consider the possibility that there was something far more dangerous at play: unpredictability. "She's a wild card," one spectator whispered, their voice thick with disbelief. "She's not supposed to be here." "How can you predict what she'll do next?" another answered. "That's why she's dangerous." At the edge of the arena, the competitors gathered, their faces a mixture of grim determination and reluctant admiration. It was clear that Lena had already earned the respect of those who once dismissed her as a mere distraction. But no one knew what would happen next. Lena wasn't about to play it safe. She wasn't about to follow anyone's idea of what was appropriate in the tournament. That wasn't her style. And as the final match loomed ahead, Lena only smiled, her mind racing with possibilities. What ridiculous, clever thing could she do next? The Grandmaster Zixo watched as she strode toward her designated position, his cold eyes narrowing. The game had changed, and he wasn't sure he could control it anymore. The covenant of Gifting's arena was silent, the weight of the moment palpable. The final showdown was upon them. Lena Carter, the unpredictable human, stood across from Riser the Infinite, the ancient being whose power and intelligence had made him nearly unbeatable. The energy in the air felt electric, thick with anticipation. A crowd of hundreds of alien species waited with bated breath, unsure of what to expect. Riser's form was a shifting nebula, swirling with dark energy. His eyes, glowing like two distant stars, locked onto Lena with an intensity that could burn to the fabric of space. He was the master of control, every movement calculated, every decision precise. His reputation as a strategist was legendary. And yet, here stood Lena Carter, a human who had no place being in the final. She adjusted her jumpsuit, her casual demeanor in sharp contrast to Riser's imposing presence. A small grin tugged at her lips, the corners of her mouth twitching, as if she were gearing up for something ridiculous. She had no advanced weaponry, no energy-based abilities, just her ingenuity, unpredictability, and, of course, her duct tape. The crowd murmured nervously. Riser didn't even flinch as he raised one arm, his energy pulsing in the air around him. The arena shook, the force of his power causing ripples in the ground beneath their feet. A black hole materialized in the center of the arena, expanding outward with a gravitational pull that would crush anything caught in its wake. Lena didn't seem alarmed in the slightest. She pulled out a small, shiny object from her pocket, a superglue pen. She held it up as though it were a weapon and waved it at Riser. "I think I've got this," she said casually, her voice carrying across the arena. The crowd froze, unsure whether she was joking. Riser's eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable. "You think you can defeat me with glue?" Lena gave him a playful shrug, then rolled up her sleeves. "I'm not going to defeat you. I'm just going to annoy you. Trust me, it'll work." The black hole kept expanding, threatening to swallow everything in its path. But Lena wasn't backing down. With a swift motion, she tossed the superglue pen into the air, where it began to float. She pulled out a small mirror from her pocket, angled it just right to catch the light, and aimed it toward the black hole. The energy shifted. The light from the mirror reflected in strange patterns, disrupting the gravitational pull of the black hole. Riser's eyes widened in confusion. His perfect calculations were faltering. "What were you doing?" Riser demanded, his voice laced with frustration. Lena grinned. "I'm disrupting the flow of your energy. You can manipulate the forces, but you didn't account for random reflection, did you? Chaos." Riser roared, his nebula form glowing brighter with fury. He launched a barrage of dark energy blasts toward Lena, each one precise and deadly. But Lena, with her uncanny reflexes and complete lack of fear, darted to the side, narrowly avoiding the blasts. She didn't even flinch as the explosions shook the ground around her. "Ha! You missed!" Lena yelled, laughing as she spun on her heel and kicked a nearby rock toward him. The rock collided with Riser's energy field, but it wasn't the rock that caught his attention. It was the duct tape she had just slapped on the bottom of her boot. The tape peeled off with a loud rip as Lena slid on the rock, skidding across the ground and narrowly avoiding another blast of energy. She stood up with a dramatic flourish, her arms raised. "It's all about momentum, baby. You don't have to be perfect. Just have fun with it." Riser's nebula flickered with a surge of energy, his form twisting as he recalibrated his attack. He was growing desperate. This human was maddening, and she refused to obey any logical structure or pattern. His mind, trained for centuries to control every variable, was failing him. "You're chaos incarnate," he snarled, his voice echoing in the vastness of the arena. "And chaos has no place in this arena." Lena tilted her head. "You think you're the only one who can break the rules?" She pulled another object from her pocket, a whoopee cushion. "I'm just getting started." She tossed the whoopee cushion toward Riser. The crowd gasped. The whoopee cushion landed with a faint squeak at Riser's feet, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. Riser stared down at it, his face a mixture of disbelief and outrage. Is this some kind of joke?" Lena shrugged again, her grin wide. "You never know when a good laugh will disarm someone. Trust me, it works." The unexpected absurdity of the moment seemed to break the tension. Riser hesitated just long enough for Lena to spring into action, using the distraction to launch herself forward. She reached into her bag of tricks and pulled out a makeshift net. A simple net, nothing special, but it was enough to disrupt Riser's concentration. As the net tangled around his energy field, it temporarily blocked his ability to channel his powers. Lena stood there, panting with exhaustion, but grinning. "I told you I had it under control." Riser, now restrained by his own chaotic surroundings, could do nothing but watch in fury as Lena Carter, the human with no training, no technique, and no business in the final, danced circles around him. "Sometimes," Lena said, her voice louder now, "the real power isn't in knowing the rules. It's in knowing how to break them." With a final laugh, she hurled a ball of duct tape at the floating Riser, and with that, the arena erupted in cheers. As the final blast of energy dissipated, the arena fell into an eerie silence. Lena Carter, panting from the chaotic final confrontation, stood victorious, her arms raised in triumph, though she looked every bit the underdog. Riser the Infinite, the ancient being whose powers had shaped galaxies, now floated motionless in the center of the arena, tangled in a net made of nothing more than common duct tape. The crowd, alien and human alike, erupted into an explosion of cheers and gasps, some in disbelief, others in awe. Lena's victory wasn't one of sheer power or brute force. It wasn't about technical skill or ancient wisdom. It was about breaking the mold, about challenging the very idea of what a champion should look like. She had disrupted an entire galaxy's understanding of combat, and now she was the one who stood at the pinnacle. The traditionalists, the powerful, the polished, none of them had seen this coming. Grandmaster Zixo, who had watched the match from the sidelines, his expression unreadable as usual, now hovered in the air above the arena. His eyes flickered with something resembling respect. He had seen it all: calculation, precision, generations of refined skill, but this was new. This human, this single mother with no magical abilities or cosmic training, had completely transformed the very nature of the contest. He approached her after the dust settled, his deep voice echoing through the still air. "You have broken the game," he said, his words slow and measured. "You defied everything we've come to know as tradition. The rules, the system, it all meant nothing in the face of your creativity." Lena shrugged, still catching her breath. "I'm just trying to make it work." "Who needs rules when you've got duct tape and a sense of humor?" she replied, flashing a grin. "Honestly, though, I've never been good at following the rules. I figured it was time to show what I could do." Zixo's scales shifted to a contemplative pattern, an ancient gesture of reflection. "Perfection doesn't leave room for evolution," he admitted, his voice laced with a hint of curiosity. "In your chaos, you've found a way to evolve." Lena nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. "I think you're right. I didn't come here to prove I could follow the rules. I came here to prove that sometimes breaking them is exactly what you need." Her victory rippled through the galaxy, sending shockwaves to the covenant of gifting and beyond. Across various species, from the gaseous entities of virus to the silicon-based Ithric, conversation sparked about the value of creativity, adaptability, and breaking with tradition. Lena, with all her quirks and imperfections, had done the impossible. She had shown them that the old ways weren't the only way forward. Back in the quiet of her private quarters, Lena sat down, her feet propped up on a simple metal crate, a cup of cold coffee in her hand. The victory still felt surreal. She hadn't just won the tournament. She had dismantled the very foundation on which the tournament was built. "Maybe I am a little more than just a mother," she mused aloud to herself, staring at the stars through her window. Her journey had been one of rejection, of being told she didn't belong, of being dismissed because she wasn't properly trained or worthy by anyone's standards except her own. But here she was, a champion in a galaxy that didn't know what hit it. And as she sipped her coffee, Lena smiled, knowing she had proven one simple truth to herself and the universe. Sometimes the best way to win is to stop trying to play by the rules. The days after Lena's victory felt like a blur. Nexus Prime, once a place of tradition and ancient rituals, had become something else. Something new. Something unexpected. The covenant of gifting had been thrown into a tailspin, and the galaxy, as it had always known itself, was shifting. Lena had, with a few swipes of duct tape and a well-timed distraction, turned centuries of custom on its head. But the aftermath wasn't just about her personal victory. It was the ripple effects that had people and creatures of all sorts wondering what had just happened. Lena's victory had inspired conversations from the highest councils of Virus to the farthest reaches of the Xanthian Belt. Across planets, sectors, and galaxies, one simple question floated in the air like an unanswered challenge. What if there's more than one way to do things? The Council of Tizavar, a prestigious gathering of ancient, powerful beings who had once looked down on Lena, now had to reconsider their rigid approach. For generations, they had ruled with absolute precision, their crystal-clear thought patterns dictating everything from diplomacy to warfare. But after Lena's unorthodox style dismantled their most treasured traditions, their once perfect system was beginning to show cracks. Lena didn't know it yet, but her actions had sparked a movement, a new school of thought. Across the galaxy, students were beginning to rethink combat, tactics, and strategy. On distant moons, young beings were scouring the old training manuals for loopholes in traditional methods, while secretly practicing their own unorthodox approaches. And in the silent shadows of Nexus Prime, an underground network began to take shape, one that would push the boundaries of what it meant to be a warrior in this galaxy. The Kithar, a race that manipulated energy in ways that defied all known laws of physics, had already begun to alter their training regimens, experimenting with combining chaos theory and energy manipulation. Some of them had even started sending secret transmissions to Lena, eager to learn more about her techniques, about how she could take something as unpredictable as human nature and make it a weapon. Then there was Riser the Infinite, whose defeat had reverberated through every corner of the galaxy. It was the first time anyone had truly seen his mind falter, his perfect control disrupted by an entirely new kind of force. For the first time in centuries, Riser felt something he hadn't in ages: uncertainty. The great and wise Riser now faced a crisis. He could no longer rely on his traditional methods. He would have to adapt or risk being left behind. And though his pride refused to admit it, his thoughts had already begun to shift toward Lena. What had she done to him? What had she revealed about the universe that even his millennia of wisdom couldn't have anticipated? Meanwhile, Lena had returned to her quiet life in the industrial sector of Nexus Prime. She was back to being a cargo loader, sipping mediocre coffee and struggling to keep her life together. But she knew she wasn't the same person who had first set foot in the arena months ago. She had changed the rules, and the universe was starting to take notice. It wasn't long before she was contacted by a figure who had heard of her, someone powerful enough to make the hairs on the back of her neck stand up just by the sheer weight of their name. A message arrived one quiet morning in her inbox. Lena Carter, you have disrupted the status quo. For that, we invite you to a new challenge. Meet us at the Midnight Station at the edge of the Starlight Nebula. Consider it a test. Lena's fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure of what to make of the invitation. Who was this? Why did they think she was ready for another challenge? She leaned back in her chair, gazing at the neon lights flickering through her window. A part of her wanted to ignore it. It felt like the kind of thing that would get her into trouble. But another part, the part that had beaten Riser, the part that had defied 1,000 years of tradition, couldn't resist the pull. She stared at the message one last time, her heart racing with a familiar feeling of adventure. It had started as a random whim, something to prove that maybe, just maybe, a human could belong in a galaxy of infinite beings. But now it was so much more. Now she had the chance to change everything. The text from the unknown sender flickered one more time across her screen. The galaxy is changing. You are part of that change. The only question is, will you continue to evolve with it or be left behind? With a deep breath, Lena hit reply. I'll be there. And when I show up, I'm bringing duct tape. As the response sent, Lena stood up from her chair and glanced around her modest quarters. A sense of exhilaration stirred within her chest. The galaxy was on the verge of something new, and she was going to be right in the middle of it. She had broken the rules once. And now, Lena Carter had a whole universe to unbreak. From distant corners of the galaxy, beings began to whisper of a new force. The human who had laughed at the rules. the human who had caused the universe to rethink everything it believed was possible. As she grabbed her bag, her boots tapping lightly against the floor, Lena knew that this was only the beginning. Whatever lay ahead, whether it was a new fight, a new journey, or something completely different, she was ready. After all, when you've already defied the odds, why stop now? And with that, the galaxy waited. What would Lena Carter do next?